In this video, we're going to talk about my 2 principles for PC backstories that are going to keep your players inherently invested. We'll cover some different approaches to backstory first, then get into my examples that you can steal for your games, no matter the system. We'll talk about why these rules are important and how you can practically apply them to change your games for the better. By the way, hi, I'm Grant Breeze, and this place is Mossy Antler, where we find meaning in our games. What I hope you'll take away is that backstory doesn't have to cause any problems, and it can be used for big payoffs. The first principle is for setup, and the second one is for payoff. Both are meant to keep your players hooked. But to know whether or not we should have a given rule for backstories, first we need to understand something really important: those approaches I mentioned. Everything that happens in role-playing games is resolved in one of 2 ways: through communication or through design, sometimes both. And both of these things set our expectations. If you don't resolve things with either communication or design, then there will be unclear or unmet expectations, which feels really bad and can lead to real-life conflict with your friends. An example: D&D 5e combat has a lot of design to resolve physical conflict within the fiction of the game world. And 5e social encounters are designed in a way that tends to come down to a single skill test d20 roll, pass or fail. That's relatively little design. So all other aspects of social encounters, like behavior, motivations, and emotions, the intricate complexities of human and non-human social interplay, you have to resolve them all through communication at the table. Often that's done by the GM simply making a decision about how an NPC should act, which works most of the time. For PC backstories, if you don't use either rules or communication, that's where issues happen because of the unclear expectations. Everyone's not on the same page. The player feels free to write an elaborate backstory where, say, their character craves revenge on the vampire lord that murdered their family, or whatever. But that's a lot of expectations to put on the GM, who's probably running a completely different game from that, and can lead to disappointment in the player if they never get that revenge. So if you avoid this issue by leaving backstory all up to communication, that's great, and it works perfectly well. My Sorlock, Elias, had a fairly elaborate backstory in the last 5e campaign I played in. I pitched a connection to Lord Baal, Archdevil of Hell, among other things, and my GM said directly, "I'm not sure if any of this will be relevant or if I could pay it off." And that was fine. We communicated clearly. I was unconcerned about it after that, and I tried to lean into the game my GM wanted to run. A lot of the stuff that I wrote became just for me, and it was still a great game. You can communicate with your players, just write something that inspires you, and the purpose of backstory is to tell us how you got to this point, not to tell us where you're going. We'll discover the rest in play. Or you can create rules that give structure and guidance. That's what rules are for. Rules like, keep it under 400 words if you want me to read it. Or give me 5 knives from Knife Theory. Look up Knife Theory, it's pretty cool. Or the rules I'm about to get to. When you go the design approach and create guidelines, you can reduce the communication needed because you're already on the same page with your players about what to expect. And it means you can create backstory rules that not only tell the table where a PC has been, but also point to where they're headed, without putting too much burden on you as the GM. Rules for drama and satisfying payoff. Rules that will keep your players invested. So, first the setup principle and then the payoff principle. The setup principle is, backstory explains how each individual PC and how the party got to the present moment in the game world. The rules you're going to design for this principle are for the setup of the game. You're helping the players answer the question, how did we all end up here together? You're starting the game, making sure the beginning of the story is believable, and making sure the players have ownership in it. Verisimilitude and contribution create emotional investment. Here are some rules that follow the setup principle. What a character was doing before they joined up with the party. Backstory from 5e, of course. Careers in Draw Steel, which I really like. And any other rules around upbringing, culture, or ancestry. I found that players love to come up with this stuff and you don't need a ton of structure here. Next, the thing that made them leave their normal lives and go adventuring. Draw Steel has an inciting incident you can choose for each career. Such a cool idea. Of course we want to know why your character isn't choosing to live a normal life, and these options are really fun. I'm definitely going to be stealing this. How the party came together. This adds a lot of party cohesion. Daggerheart's inciting incident, not to be confused with Draw Steals, does this, making an exciting event that brings everyone into the story quickly. Or you could set it up so that in one of the days leading up to the events of the first session, you have each of the players describe how their PC's normal day was interrupted by a dark magical force that is going to be a motif in the adventure. Ownership, remember? Or you could do the classic version of this, which is randos meeting in a tavern. Nothing wrong with tropes, they exist for a reason. Another version of this is a group or organization that acts as a clear reason why the party sticks together. And it's so good that I will always have this in my games. My GM that I mentioned earlier did this for the last game, saying, you're part of an organization that destroys domains of dread. How you got into the organization is up to you. But you could just as easily make a bunch of organization ideas and let the players pick as a group. If you sign up to the Mossy Antler Patreon at the free tier, you can see the write-up for this video, which includes a list of organization with descriptions that I made for you. Link in the doobly-doo. I personally like limiting it down to 3 or 4 options so I can make sure the organization they pick reflects what the campaign is going to be about. By the way, if you're enjoying this and want to help it reach more people, leave a like. That'd be neat. Okay, we went over the setup principle and some rules you could have for it. Now the payoff principle. Backstory sets things up for a payoff at some point in the future. The rules you're going to design for this principle are going to give both the player and you as GM ways to enact authorial control over the narrative. I know putting it that way sounds legitimately concerning to some of you, but it just means that while you're in one moment of the game, you or your players are pointing toward the next moment of the game or some future moment. The rules already do this all the time in ways you might not realize, and we'll go over those in a second. But at least for me, the players surprising me by changing what I expected from the story is like 90% of what I want for my games. The other 10% is making them cry. Not just tear up either, like ugly sobbing cry, and yeah, I know that's messed up. The heart wants what it wants. Anyways, if you set your rules right, the things your players choose can be used as motifs. These are recurring features of your game that not only feel extremely cool when you bring them in, but also enforce that juicy player investment that gets them excited to come back every week. Like I said, there are lots of games that have rules built in for story payoffs, but here are the ones that I like and or use. Ancestry and Culture from Daggerheart. These rules empower the player to create their own narrative beats. The abilities you get from them point to some in-game future moment, and they're all on cards. Very cool design, easy to pass around the table. If you have CLANK, you get Purposeful Design. Decide who made you and for what purpose. If a player makes a robot, you're gonna want to bring their maker into the game at some point. Imagine how emotional that scene will be. SEABORNE gives you Know the Tide. You can sense the ebb and flow of life. That's vague by design, and gives characters many opportunities to make metaphors about the ocean where they grew up. That's cool. Next, Complications from Draw Steel. Directly inspired from the backstories of characters in Baldur's Gate 3, these are things like Karlach's mechanical heart and Shadowheart's mysterious artifact or connection to her dark god. Imagine if a whole system was built out from this starting point. One can dream. Next, Obligations and Loose Ends. This is my cleaned up version of Knife Theory. Again, link to the write-up with details on this below. These are connections to NPCs from a character's past. This one is really strong. Your players will care about your game if they can care about the people who live in your game world, because the meaning of life is other people. I'll talk about how to make compelling NPCs in a future video, so you can subscribe to stick around to see that. All right, you made it this far. Here is my spiciest rule, the core urge. Some negative event happened to your character, and the core urge is how they emotionally deal with that. The core urge is their coping mechanism and the lens they see the world through. It describes their entire approach to life. To stop anything like negative event from happening to me again, I strive for urge. I watched my family be cut down by a vampire coven before I was strong enough to do anything about it. Now I'm self-reliant and make sure I'm in control. Now that's a backstory. You can print out the sheet I made for this and include it with your player's character sheet. That sheet, an example of more core urges, are in the write-up. Knowing how your character would respond to any situation by knowing their fundamental psychology is a very powerful tool for immersion. It's not about personality, it's about their approach to encountering the world. It's their drive, their soul, their core purpose for acting. It is the way they grapple with reality. Giving each PC a core urge is something I accidentally stumbled into in the first major campaign I ran. I sort of forced a rudimentary version of this on each of the characters, which I don't recommend, by the way. You usually want player buy-in. The character arcs and payoffs were so lovely. One of the most impactful was when I transported Kosif, a PC, forward in time by 40 years. His main motivation was to figure out how to go back in time to get back to his wife and 8-year-old daughter. And then I made him resolve that tension by having him meet up with his daughter, who had grown up without her dad. I know, I'm a sicko. It's my favorite campaign that I've run because of the player's choices to deal with those core urges and how they affected the story. It's an incredible tool, but the real magic happens when you put things in the game that challenge the usefulness of a character's urge, aka you ask them to change into a healthier person. Either the character adopts a new perspective by the end of the story, or they don't. That's up to them. And it almost goes without saying that these things will require player buy-in, and the shorter your campaign, the fewer of these you'll be able to pay off or bring up during play, so be careful about that. I recommend going over these during your session 0. Ideally, they're answered collaboratively. It's way easier to get excited about the game when you build backstories together. You can even design your campaign outwards from what your players give you here. And if you do, that'll be a game none of you ever forgets. That's it. YouTube thinks you'll like this video next, and if you like my shirt, you can get your own and other dope shirts for game nights at mossyantler.com. And remember, there's always a path forward. Now go find it.